Passing It On, Folklore of St. Louis. That's next on City Corner. I'm Steve Potter, and welcome to City Corner. We'd like to welcome our guest today, Dr. John Oldani. He's written the book, Passing It On, Folklore of St. Louis, and welcome to the program.
Thank you, Steve. Nice to be here. Thanks for asking me.
Well, I think I know what folklore is. How would you define it?
I define folklore as the oral traditions which circulate among a culture, a group, a region, and the things that I always tell my students, it's the unlearned learning process you remember. Instead of the diagram sentence you did, or instead of the algebraic equation, they might ask you if you go to a hotel, do you mind sitting on the sleeping on the 13th floor? Well, you know about 13 being a bad luck, not whether you believe it or not.
Right.
So it's the unlearned learning process you stick with you.
And so that's a pretty big umbrella then.
It is, but it covers many different things because what we talk about is the verbal folklore, the nonverbal folklore, and the partly verbal.
Partly verbal?
Partly verbal, meaning that you could have superstitions. If you drop salt, you pick it up and throw it over your left shoulder, which is partly verbal and partly has to do with gestures.
Well, I guess by that definition, there must be so much more folklore than you could throw a stick at.
We have in my archive collection right now over 200,000 items related to the spoken word all the way down to the non-spoken word.
And that's primarily just St. Louis related,
it's
right?
Only St. Louis regional, yes. Which covers Illinois side and also the St. Louis region.
Well, your book, Passing It On, Folklore of St. Louis, this is actually the second edition.
Yes, it's volume 2. Volume 1 came out in 2008, I think. But there was so much material that we'll have a new one coming out soon.
You mentioned, John, something about your students.
Yeah.
And you spent years, I don't know how many years, as a professor.
30.
30 years.
30 years.
A couple of different places, right?
Oh, yes, I taught at University of, well, mostly at SIU Edwardsville. I was over there for 30 years, and I'm emeritus today. But I also was a visiting professor at University of Florida and University of Berkeley in California, and I taught at St. Louis U. Then I also taught at University of Zagreb in Croatia.
Wow. And you were, I guess, at Edwardsville, professor of American Studies?
Exactly.
Which is what?
Well, I directed the program American Studies, which means it's the interdisciplinary approach to the study of America. So you take the literature, the history, the sociology, the anthropology, the cultures of folklore, painting, literature, and combine them to try and get a total picture of the United States.
Huh. And you've done a lot of things related to that, too. I know for years you had a syndicated newspaper column. You were on KMOX.
I did 25 years on KMOX every week, and that was fed to special programs in Los Angeles and Boston, Chicago, and Phoenix. And I would collect a lot of folklore from those areas to compare them to St. Louis.
Well, gee, you taught it in college, you had a newspaper article, a syndicated radio show. What's the fascination people must have with it?
This is our life. I believe that I have a passion for folklore, and people tend to ascribe it only to the old wives' tales. It's not that, and it's not all false things and lies. Folklore represents our very foundation. There's no vacuum in folklore, Steve. None. There's meaning to everything that's being said.
I'm going to read something right out of your preface here.
All right.
And just have you comment on it. The book is Passing It On. When Passing It On was released, that would have been the first one in 2008,
yeah.
Readers were introduced to a new way of understanding their culture, especially the culture of St. Louis. What followed was very welcome and bordering on incredible. People from all over the region became informants. Those who believed they had no folklore suddenly remembered.
Exactly. When I'd done this for 30 years, but when I wanted to put out the book, I asked some people to update that so I could validate it. They said, we don't have any folklore. And so I gave them samples of it and showed them the book. Then they started calling me and said, oh my goodness, that's folklore, I didn't know that. So that added to my collection of my text. And many more things developed about St. Louis.
I've been hosting the St. Louis Storytelling Festival for the last 3 or 4 years. In fact, did it just recently. And so it's occurring to me that I guess there's an element of folklore to storytelling, I guess.
Oh, absolutely. Sure, because the stories themselves might be cautionary, they have some moral to them, might be allegorical, but they relate to the person's belief and cultures.
Well, in your book, Passing It On, Folklore of St. Louis, And I really related to this because you talk about your grandmother, and I had
Yes.
an old German grandmother myself, which I want to share some things with you too. I
Yeah.
really related to it. But you say that your grandmother changed your life.
My grandmother's from Croatia, which was then Yugoslavia.
Okay,
And,
close then.
yeah, she came here in 1916 and met my grandfather here. Her name was Cecilia Karlic Knez, K-N-E-Z. And she just sat and talked all about the oral traditions of Croatia and what it meant to her. And those same stories had to do with folk beliefs, had to do with traditions, customs, folk foods, superstitions, language. And I was fascinated by all of that. And so I dedicated the book to her.
Yeah, I mentioned I had an old German grandmother, and she was born in 1891 and died a month short of her 104th birthday.
Oh,
So long story short, I heard a lot of stories and things
Yeah.
growing up that I wish I'd written down.
Oh, sure. But I bet some of those things are still in whatever you call your subconscious somewhere, and you might practice those. Who knows?
I've got a couple I'm going to share with you, but
Okay.
what are a couple of your grandmother's sayings that you remember?
Well, a lot of them have to do with, in fact, I heard it in Missouri afterwards, bide your time, and when you catch them asleep, pour hot lead in their ears.
What exactly does that mean?
It means, the whole idea is that God doesn't pay every Friday. That's what she always said. So, she believed strongly in a God and a superior being. And she said, things aren't always going to come out as you want, but it will happen. It's kind of like the karma concept. And she wasn't an evil person, but she always said, just be patient.
How about another one?
Well, a lot of them she talked about were things like what you eat, the food you eat. Like when you come to someone's house and you partake of their food, you have a magic of transference. So if you ate her potica, which was her Croatian strudel or Croatian bread, you would also partake of that yeast and the salt that was in that, and which is, of course, traditionally and folkloristically, bottom line, you would also become rich and abundant. And you had to eat always a pickled herring on New Year's Eve.
I do that too.
Do you?
'Cause that's so not to increase your fortune or something?
Oh, exactly, become abundant. And we found out that the pickled herring has the milk glands in it. So that's the abundance and the fertility associated with the woman's reproductive organs.
A couple things I remember about my old German grandmother. One thing she'd always say, well, let me preface by saying this, that a big part of your book is people like me have sent in their folklore, and you've reprinted some of that from other people.
Oh, yes. Oh, sure.
That's a big part of it.
Oh, exactly. But at the same time, I don't do it unless I collect it 5 times and have it validated. When I wrote the Johnny Cash radio program, which is still out there, I want to make sure I validated the stuff that I collected from Kentucky and Tennessee as related to St. Louis.
Well, since you bring it up just for a second, yeah, you tell us about the Johnny Cash program.
Yeah, well, I was on KMOX one night, and he had come to town for a concert at the Fox, and he and his agent heard the program, got interested, so they invited us to the next show. We went backstage, and one thing led to another, and I've written 500 scripts for him on 330 stations, which is still going on in the Southwest.
Roseanne Cash just played the Sheldon, so she'd
I
be
know.
interesting to talk to.
Oh, yeah.
Anyway, so some sayings my old grandmother said, maybe I'll send this in to you. Maybe
Yeah,
you've heard it
great.
before. And, she grew up, she was born in St. Louis, but her father came and all her relatives from Germany during the Saxony migration in
Yeah.
the mid-1800s. So she used to always say, if you want a job done right, get a good German to do it.
I have a whole chapter on German there, but yes.
I know.
Yeah,
I want to talk to you
good
about
for
that
her.
later. And she used to talk about marrying into families with money and that sort of thing. And
Oh,
she
yeah.
used to say, never marry for money. Marry where money is.
I like that. Well, we have another, my grandma used to say, they found orange peels in their garbage. They must be rich. So check the garbage out first. Way back then, oranges were expensive, so if you found orange peels, you knew they had money. Very
You
similar.
make a point in your book that while a lot of folklore can be specific to St. Louis as opposed to other cities, even in St. Louis, folklore can be very different depending on what neighborhood
Oh, yeah.
you were brought up in.
Sure. In fact, my new raised heritage has some folklore of the Bosnian culture and the Irish culture, which I've not done in the other books. But yes, especially if you go to what we call the Scrubby Dutch, there's a lot of folklore down there, which is different, especially the word pronunciation. And there's also some superstitions and folk beliefs and traditions in folk foods.
You mentioned Scrubby Dutch, and I'm looking here it's in fact page 4 of your book. And there's a part here called Folk Words, Pronunciation, and
Yes.
Grammar.
Yes.
And this is fun. This makes me think of my mom who grew up here because she was guilty of this. You say clothes and dishes are washed,
Or yes. Yeah.
and both are rinsed after
rinsed.
washing.
Yes.
And the dishes are put in the zinc.
In the zinc.
Now, is that really just St. Louis?
No, a lot of it's St. Louis. It's more pervasive here than other places. And so that's where we're putting it in there, because people use it all the time.
Let me throw a couple more out at you.
All right.
Dragonflies are snake doctors, witch doctors, or darning needles. And I don't understand that one at all.
Well, that's just what some people call these fireflies, or dragonflies, we call them. They just have different names for them. And that's what the words we use growing up telling our kids. Becomes familial lore. Like we have people over when like the dean or someone, and my kids would grab the pork chops, we'd say FHB, so family hold back. The dean didn't know that, but they would, so we tried to develop that family lore with our own vocabulary.
This one's very close to my heart.
All right.
A concrete
Yes.
is a very thick shake or malt, and sometimes synonymous with a blizzard.
Yes.
And so we're talking about like Ted Drew's.
Ted Drew's, right.
Concrete, which
Right.
is famous here in St. Louis. So is concrete totally a St. Louis?
Well, no, yes it is. I believe it started, I can't prove that, but we drove up to Michigan one year in Wisconsin where the dairies were, and they caused concretes, and they talked to us about St. Louis and Ted Drew's, and they talked about stealing the name.
Guys
So,
and
yeah.
gals.
And gals.
Right.
Yes, right.
And it's that time to go. Have you been yet this year?
Oh, not yet, no.
Okay.
He's open in February.
Is he open all year?
Well, no, but January closes.
I mean, he
December.
sells Christmas trees too.
He
I
does,
think.
he does.
There you go.
Uh-huh.
More folklore. There's no such there's no such thing as duct tape. It's always duck
It's
tape.
always duct tape. And now you can buy duct tape specifically as it's spelled, D-U-C-K, and it's patterned. And the kids are now making all kinds of crafts out of them.
And I marked this one too because this is another one my grandmother, who I was just talking about, used to say. I grew up calling a refrigerator an icebox because when I spent summers and Christmases with my grandmother here in St. Louis, there's something in the icebox, something in the icebox. I never knew why.
Yeah.
So
Do you call it a Frigidaire an icebox, you said? Or did you?
I've always called it an icebox, and everybody just looks at me weird.
Oh, yeah, no,
Because
yeah.
the old refrigerators weren't electric, they had actual blocks
That's
of
right.
ice in them.
Well, now people are saying that the Frigidaire is there too. That's not become popular. I've got that into research, and I talked to the African American culture, and they're talking about Davenports and couches and sofas.
One more before our break,
right.
John. Go on with your rat killing is a popular expression when someone's busy and can't stop to talk on the phone.
Exactly. Well, when I talk to somebody on the phone, many people I've talked to, they said, you know, I'm really busy. Can I call you back? I said, go on with your rat killing. Or I would tell them I'm too busy.
That reminds me of my grandfather. He had one of those too, and I didn't figure this out for years. We'd always be over at his house watching TV, and he'd get up and go, I got to go talk to a guy about a dog. It took me years to figure out that meant he was going to the bathroom.
Exactly.
You've heard that one?
Oh, yes. Sometimes it was a different animal, which was more connotative.
I was just like, what dog, what guy?
Yes,
Never
right.
could figure it out.
Right.
Well, passing it on, Folklore of St. Louis, that's our topic today, and we'll be back with more right after this. Stay with us.
Advisor is being accused of committing one of the largest investment frauds in the history of the United States.
I guess we're not going to Aspen. That's fine. You see, I like tennis balls. He likes insider trading. So he's going to jail and I'm going to a shelter. And no, they're not the same thing. Shelters are for good pets that want to be adopted. Jails are for criminals. I did nothing. Uh-oh. Ooh, okay, I stole a cheeseburger once. I'm my dog.
For those dealing with the struggles of caring for a loved one, we hear you. Visit aarp.org/caregiving for advice and support.
Over 13 million people are affected by famine, war, and drought in the Horn of Africa.
Make a simple text donation of $10.
But do more than donate. Forward the facts.
When some people struggle with their mortgage payments, they become frozen, petrified. Not knowing what to do, they do nothing. But the people who take action are far more likely to get the most positive outcome. Making home affordable is a free government program. Call now to talk one-on-one with a housing expert about the options that are right for you. Real help, real answers, right now.
I'm Steve Potter, and welcome back to City Corner. We're talking about the folklore of St. Louis, passing it on. Folklore of St. Louis is the name of the book. It's traditions, superstitions, rituals, and folk beliefs. John Oldani is the author, and he's our guest today. And as we were talking about before, John, you've been a longtime professor in the area and other places, sort of specializing in folklore and related topics. You had a newspaper column, syndicated newspaper column for a long time, and you did a folklore thing on KMOX for, what did you say, 20 years?
25 years,
25 years. And this book, Passing It On, is the second edition. You've also done some other books, which I happen to have right here.
Yeah.
Of course, Passing It On, the original.
Original, great.
And how about this one?
Oh, that was that.
What, you did what in the ditch?
I tried to show there's folk groups. Those are all quilters. That was released in the American Folk Art Museum in New York. We went up there a couple years ago, and it's doing really well with quilters.
And here's one, Sweetness Preserved, the story of the Crown Candy Kitchen, which I think is close to everybody's heart.
It is. It's 100 years old today, and how important that is and pervasive. There was a question on Jeopardy about Crown Candy. People not been there, and they got it correct.
Did it have anything to do with egg salad sandwiches?
No, it was the Crown Candy Kitchen in St. Louis is famous for what contest? And the person knew that. If you drink the 5 malts in a half an hour, you get them all free.
No kidding. Do they still do that?
They still do it. They have a list of the ones who've done it.
Well, we talked about earlier the importance of your grandmother.
Yes.
And I talked about my grandmother and, you know, passing down folklore and traditions. Did the generations do that as much as our grandmothers did?
Well, it depends. They're changing. They did things that were a little different now. We have people like college students, athletes. We have like the folk groups, occupational groups like quilters who do that. Plus senior citizens now are doing it. Baby boomers are doing it. We have the Battle of the Sexes, where we're still having these kinds of controversies with men and women. It's kind of fun stuff, but it's passed down in a different way now. But it's still being passed down.
Well, in addition to your grandmother, there's another living thing that was very important to you, and we have a picture of that, and that is a dog in your life, Mouse.
Oh, Mouse, yeah, Mouse. I was never a dog lover until my kids got Mouse they rescued Mouse, who was abused, even ears clipped off, and Mouse was very important to me because I take Mouse for walks all the time and bring him special treats and watch him and take care of him. And Mouse was there as unconditional love, which is such a cliche, but was important for him, especially because he was so abused. But Mouse let me into folklore of animals and what was involved with that. And there's a lot of that there because they become folk beliefs and even superstitions. But I notice how more and more people believe that they sense things differently and what it leads to.
Passing It On, Chapter 4, Riddles and Jokes. How can you tell if you're from St. Louis? I think this is pretty funny.
Oh, yeah.
And you start off, you mentioned that old joke that we all probably started telling when we were about 3 years old. What's black and white and red all over?
Exactly. That's the most common conundrum because there's a pun in the question and answer. And there's at least, 10 answers for that. It's a newspaper. My age people say we're a newspaper, pun on the word red. Other people say it's a wounded nun, and a nun gave me that joke. And people say it's a embarrassed zebra, or people say it's a skunk with diaper rash. People say it's Fidel, penguin. The whole idea of red being communist. So there's a lot of answers to that. We collected them all here from St. Louis, even to the grade schools.
You know you're from St. Louis when? And you've got, I don't know how many, you've got dozens here, but I'm just going to pull out a couple and have you comment on them.
All right.
You know you're from St. Louis when? Vacation is a choice between Lake of the Ozarks and Silver Dollar City.
Right. Not too far away.
LA is not Los Angeles, but Lower Afton.
That's right.
You know you're from St. Louis when Velveeta is your favorite cheese. Now, wouldn't that be Provel?
Provel, yes. But people don't realize there's stuff in there about emos as a folk food, but Provel is not even a cheese. Now it's been recognized by the cheese industry. But Velveeta is there because they think this is a great cheese, and it's not even cheese. It's processed.
I like it.
I do
It
too.
makes a good grilled cheese sandwich. Come
Yes,
on.
it does.
You know you're from St. Louis when a getaway weekend trip is to Alton, which is fun, by the way.
It is.
And you know you're from St. Louis when a Hoosier lives south of Choteau and not in Indiana.
I have a whole chapter in my new research on St. Louis Hoosiers, and they're giving them to me.
My story, both my parents grew up here, and I was only here summers and Christmases, so I grew up other places,
Oh,
but I always
okay.
came back. And I didn't move back full time to the late 80s, and I didn't know all these sayings, and I'll never forget this. I remember this like it was yesterday. I was hanging around with my new friends, and we kept driving. You know, they'd be talking about people, and they go, "That person's a Hoosier." I kept thinking.
Yeah.
After a few weeks of this, I said, "Why do all these Indiana people move to St. Louis?"
No, they don't.
They're not Indiana
It's
people.
in term of endearment in Indiana. Here it's not. And there's a whole bunch of stuff. Lawyers meet on Fridays to define what a Hoosier is. Lawyers groups in St. Louis.
Is that right?
Folk groups, yeah.
You know, you mentioned earlier about how you have some chapters about Germans.
Yes.
And you do, and I found that interesting because of my heritage. But Germans played a huge part. I think you make the point in your book, even though St. Louis was founded by the French, I guess, but Germans may have had more of an influence on St. Louis personality than any other ethnic group.
And traditions. I mean, the Germans really were critical here. Well, with the Turnverein, for instance, and the educational system, and above all, Christmas, the decorations at Christmas time. I mean, the German influence was very strong there, and many groups that had come here.
You talk about the legend of the Christmas spider.
Yes, that's German, and that's important because it's told every day to kids, every Christmas time to kids, because that's where tinsel came from.
Can you condense that story just real
Sure,
quick?
the spider wanted to visit the Christ, make sure the Christ child saw him, but German women clean up all the time, had to get rid of all the spiders, so he hid in the tree. And then they missed him when they cleaned up, so his web became silver because the Christ child honored even him, the spider, who was the lowest creature.
Wow.
So it's the invention of creation of tinsel.
Well, here's some like Dutch terms, and say something about Dutchtown.
Dutchtown, yeah, that's of course in South St. Louis, and it's Dutchtown, but sometimes it's used pejoratively, Steve, because if you go Dutch someplace, what does that mean? Or if you go to Dutchtown, is it really now the same as it was then? Are the people scrubby Dutch?
I remember my grandmother talking about that too, scrubby Dutch, like, was it every Saturday?
Yes.
Every Saturday, if you were a good German,
Yep.
you went out on your front porch and you scrubbed your front steps.
And there's stone steps you had. And some people used hard brushes to do it. Had to be clean.
I can just see my grandmother doing that.
Cleanliness is next to godliness. That's their belief.
Now, it's weird, though, that the term Dutch means so many different things and it's the same word. Like, to be in Dutch, you point out, means to be in trouble.
In trouble.
And Dutch courage?
Still used. Dutch courage, what is that? Did you ever hear that expression?
No.
No. Well, the whole idea is it really courage? Is what you ask yourself. Is it really courage or not? But again, we're talking about the goods and the bads. How many times do people use that?
So Dutch courage, well, you have it because you drink too much German beer, I guess.
Oh yeah, oh yeah. You drink that and you're not afraid of anybody. It's like Irish people see leprechauns only after they're drunk. Same thing.
What about Dutch agreement?
Dutch agreement, I've heard that very much there, but it reminds me, just since I put that on, I've heard people say, them is the same as Indian giving, using that diversity.
Let's talk about food as folklore. That, you know, we talked about animals and kid sayings and all that. What about food?
Well, the food is based on legends a lot, like toasted ravioli. Mama Campisi is still angry with me for not saying that she invented toasted ravioli.
That's what I always heard.
But the Old Danny family said they did it. The Old Danny's restaurant on the hill, which became Angelo's.
That's your family?
That's my family's, then Charlie Gito's. It's always several different variations. That's how folklore works. It's not just a tradition, but the variations of that.
How about this? Something I fight about with people all the time. St. Louis pizza.
Oh yeah.
Like
Emos.
Emos, I love it.
Emos,
you know, you either love it or you hate it,
You
right?
hate it. And there's no yeast in their cracker dough. But again, when Emo did it, he cut it in the shape of tile because he was a tile maker. And now Emo's is the biggest independent in the country.
Well, I love St. Louis pizza. One thing I don't get is pork steaks. And I didn't realize this either until I've talked to other people. If you're not from here, I've met a lot of people who don't know what a pork steak
They
is.
don't. We lived in Florida, and I taught at Berkeley. We asked for them. No one heard of them before. And a pork steak simply is I think it's the butt of a pig, and it's used for barbecue. It's our traditional one. But it's got to have Maul's barbecue sauce on it.
Well, we're going to get to Maul's in a second. First, though, we have a picture of you with another piece of food folklore.
Oh, yeah. That's at Gus's Pretzels. Since 1920, they've been here producing, I think it's 9,000 a week they told me. But those things are called Mary Sticks now. The nuns from St. Agatha's and St. Peter and Paul used to buy those things and give them to the Virgin Mary every morning and then eat them before their breakfast.
I love Dad's cookies.
Oh, yeah. There's the only one left in St. Louis now. The only one left. The Scotch Oatmeal. It was a franchise way back in the 1910s, but now it's the only one left here, and they still have the same recipe they've used, for almost more than a century.
Those are good.
They're delicious.
You mentioned Maul's.
Maul's barbecue, even from 1926.
Isn't our barbecue sweeter than other places?
It is. It is. It has more oregano in it, and also a touch of vinegar. But don't baste your barbecue. Maul it.
And I'm a big root beer fan.
Oh, Fitz is terrific. But they will tell you it's so good because of the pure cane sugar they use. No one else does that. But there's also a tradition there. If you can they make their root beer floats. You've got to keep that ice cream in the cup, or you've lost the tradition.
There is a tradition. I had the privilege earlier this year of sharing with a famous person, so I've got to tell you this story. I think it's so exciting. Gooey butter cake, right?
Yeah.
That's totally a St. Louis thing.
Yes, right.
And as you know, I have a job on the radio where I have a chance a lot of time to interview performers when they're coming through town.
Oh, great, yeah.
Well, Jennifer Holliday was at the Muni reprising Dreamgirls.
Dreamgirls, right.
So I went to the Chase Park Plaza to interview her, and it was just a coincidence that day. Someone had brought some gooey butter cake to the radio station.
Oh.
So when I was getting ready to go, I thought, I'm going to take her a piece of gooey butter cake.
Yeah.
So I had a conversation with Jennifer Holliday about gooey butter cake. She never heard about it. She was fascinated.
Oh. Was it the original? Was it a chocolate variety?
No, it's the original.
Oh, that's good. We have the champion in St. Louis now. It was on the Food Network.
Oh, is that right?
On Lafayette Square.
And French onion soup, is that a St. Louis original?
It's from Famous and Bar. And that the tradition is that if you know the recipe, you can't give it for fear of dying. I'll have to kill you if you know it.
There's so much more in here, and we just have a couple seconds left. You talk about the power of the arch, which is a big legend about how the arch may affect weather across the country.
It came from 1945 when we sent engineers, witness protection program to the deserts of Arizona and New Mexico. Families didn't know where they were.
You're going to have to read about it.
They would put it's in the arch, the weather.
John Oldani, it's Passing It On, Folklore of St. Louis, available bookstores?
Bookstores, sure.
Bookstores, and we also have your contact information, your website.
That's right.
So, John, thanks so much for joining us.
Thanks for having me, Steve. I enjoyed it very much.
The Folklore of St. Louis, fascinating. Thanks for joining us today. I'm Steve Potter. We'll see you next time. Bye.